Noel MacNeal is an actor, director, puppeteer and writer of children's television who has performed in various Henson productions, working on Sesame Street on and off since 1982. And he's arguably best known as the performer of Bear from Bear in the Big Blue House. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Yes, I'm doing great. So first of all, let's start at the very beginning. How did you get into puppetry originally?
When I was a kid, there were many more puppet shows on here in the United States where I grew up, and there was people like Sherry Lewis and Lamb Chop. She was a ventriloquist. There was Kukla, Fran, and Ollie with Bert Tillstrom. And there was Paul Winchell, who was another ventriloquist, and he had a show called Winchell Mahoney Time. And Paul Winchell went on to become a voiceover artist for many cartoons, including he was the original voice of Tigger for the Winnie the Pooh Disney cartoons. And he helped create the artificial heart.
Oh, wow.
So puppetry can save lives.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yes. So, yeah. So then I had seen these kind of puppets, which were kind of like little traditional, almost like Punch and Judy style puppets, or the kind of like sock puppets like Lamb Chop. And then when I was really little, there was this show on our local public television station. And it was a Sunday night, and it was a half-hour show introducing this brand new kids show coming on tomorrow morning. And it was hosted by two puppets, and it was puppets I'd never seen before, this style, where their mouths moved in time to the words. And one kind of looked like a banana, and the other had the head of a football, and their names were Ernie and Bert. And they were talking about this new show called Sesame Street. And they showed clips, and they showed one puppet that could actually walk around by himself, and he was called Big Bird. And I knew that, I mean, I was old enough to know the alphabet and what a triangle was, but I just watched Sesame Street just for the Muppets, and then started following their career through the 70s, doing different specials and appearances on different TV shows. And then when I was in high school was the height of the Muppet Show. And that's when I thought, well, if Jim Henson and these people can make a living doing this, maybe I could too, because I always loved puppets. And it was the kind of thing where at one point I was thinking about being an actor, but being African American, I realized that my roles would be limited to gang member on the left or drug dealer on the right. So with a puppet, I could be anyone or anything I wanted to be. And so I did research the old-fashioned way. I went to, because this was before the internet and whatnot, I went to the library, which is kind of like, a bookstore, but it's free. And I did research, and at that time, there were two colleges here on the East Coast. One was in Storrs, Connecticut, at the University of Yukon in Storrs, Connecticut, where to this day you can get your four-year degree, master's degree in puppetry. And another was here in Brooklyn, New York, and it was a college called Pratt Institute. And
Nice
yes,
name.
I realized the word Pratt it means something completely different on your side of the ocean. However, here, it was just named after a guy named Pratt.
Chris.
So, yeah. So, and so they had at that time a theater department, and within the theater department was a puppetry course taught by one of the designers and builders of the Muppets. He specifically built and designed Big Bird and Mr. Snuffleupagus, and his name was Kermit Love. And no, the frog is not named after him. It's just a freaky coincidence. And so I had all these things laid out. And then I went to my mom to let her know what I wanted to be. Now, my mom was a single mom. She was holding down two jobs to send me through private school because I grew up in central Harlem. So it was a choice between the school where the kid got stabbed or the other school where the kid got shot. So she sent me downtown to the Rhodes private school. And she was a single mom. She'd been taking care of me. She had been taking care of her mother before she died and her uncle before he died. And this was all after my father walked out on us when I was 18 months old. And so I was telling this single mom holding on two jobs, okay, I know what I want to be. I want to be a puppeteer. And I just braced myself for what she would say. And she looked at me and she said, okay, what do we have to do?
Oh, wow.
Well, and it's like, and it just threw me. It was like, well, there's this, and there's this college. And she said, okay, what do we have to do? Well, this is due on this day. This is on this day. It's like, okay, what do we have to do? That's all she kept saying.
Yeah.
She never belittled it. She never dismissed it. She never patronized me about it. And she said, always told me, because she'd been a secretary, then got promoted to a private secretary. And she said, I've been typing the same letters for the past 20 years. She said, you can always get a job, get a career. And so that's what I did. So with her blessing, that's how I pretty much started. So between Jim Henson and my mom, that's how I started my little journey into puppetdom.
Yeah. And do you remember what the first job you ever got was in puppetry?
Yeah, actually, it was through Kermit. I mean, when I was in college, I would make side money by doing like birthday parties for kids. But my first professional job as a puppeteer came through Kermit's workshop, because even though he did stuff for the Muppets, he had his own workshop. And his workshop got this job to do these 3 commercials for a product called Magie Bouillon Cubes. And what was amazing was that it was 3 commercials, but it was 3 commercials to be shot in Paris. And so it was my first professional job, my first time going to Europe, my first time going to Paris, my first time on an airplane. I had to like apply for a passport ASAP. And so that was my first professional gig. And we shot them for about like 4 days because with the, I realized later on, like everybody has a different schedule. And for this particular commercial, the French had their own schedule. So the first day we went in, it was a studio outside of Paris, and we got driven there. And we got there around 9 o'clock, and things were being set up and kind of like talked through and run through until 10:30. And then we broke for lunch and got driven to this nearby restaurant. And for the next 2 hours, just sat with the client and the director and his staff and just ate and drank. And it's just like, okay. And then we came back, and then we just pretty much shot like straight through until that evening, and got out around like 7 o'clock or so, something like that. And so that was it for like the next like 3 days after that. So, but yeah, that was my first professional job, even before working on Sesame.
Yeah. And then how did you get the chance to work on Sesame Street? Was that a similar thing?
Kermit was, because he had designed and built Big Bird, he was the wrangler on Sesame Street. The wrangler is the person who preps the puppets and makes sure they are camera ready. So make sure that any props or any costumes that are needed are prepared for the puppets, and also just the puppet themselves, whether or not the puppeteer needs a right hand, or if the right hand should be pinned and stuffed, or whatever. And so he had gotten himself an assistant, and so who was there for many years. The assistant moved on to another job. And so just before they went back into production in the September of 1982, which would have been my senior year of college, he asked me what I want to be as assistant on Sesame Street. So after thinking it over for a nanosecond, I said yes, and just never went back, and just started on Sesame Street as the wrangler, which was great because I had a great education in television production, especially for like the ultimate kids show, because back then Sesame Street was an hour, and the season would last from like September almost to like the middle of March of like the following year. So it was like this really nice long stretch because they would do so many original shows. Street stories that took place on the street. And then what was called the Muppet Inserts, where they would, for a week, not do the street stories and give the human a break, as well as Carol, because Carol Spinney, my mentor, was Oscar and Big Bird. And so he'd get that week off. And then that's when they would do the inserts with Bert and Ernie and Cookie and Kermit and Grover and any little miscellaneous Muppets on these little side sets. And that's when Jim Henson and Frank Oz would come in and do their characters. So that's how I started on Sesame. And then I transitioned to being like a background puppeteer and right hand. Right hand means assisting the principal puppeteer. So like mostly right-handing means working with the puppets that are called practical hand puppets, which you you've seen. You just didn't know they were called these. But it takes two people. So, the Count, Cookie Monster, Fozzie Bear. Those are the kind of puppets where Jerry Nelson, who was the Count, he would put his hand inside the Count's head and his other hand in the Count's left hand. And then I would put my right hand into the Count's right hand so that this way it would look like he had both hands going for counting and pointing. And there's this classic bit that's on YouTube. It's called the Batty Bat. And it's this kind of waltz that the Count sings. And I was doing his right hand. And Richard Hunt, one of the other puppeteers on Sesame, he was one of the principal puppeteers. For the Muppets, he was Janice and Scooter, and he was also on Sesame Street. He was on Fraggle Rock. And he gave me this great tip saying that because Jerry and I would literally have to twirl around, he told me to take my thumb and loop it through the back of Jerry's belt loop in back and pretty much just hang on.
Yeah.
And so that's what I did. When it was time to dance, I would just I looped my thumb and just held on and we just twirled around. And it looks great. Yeah. From from the elbow up, it looks great. Down below, it's a mess because I'm trying not to trip over the man. And it's just and the thing is, it's all one take. They put in these little inserts of the bats, little close-ups of them singing. But the whole song is just one, without those inserts, it was one solid take with no cuts of the Count just singing, which was great.
Yeah, definitely. And then, of course, years later, you went on to work on Bear in the Big Blue House in about 1997. So how did you get approached to work on that?
Wow, we're just jumping light years here. Okay. I'd been puppeteering for a while, and Jim Henson Company knew me. And so I actually got called in to audition for this character that morning. And it was actually for a game show. And it was this kind of big character. And I thought, okay, this is nice. And it was fun. Then I went back home. And then later that afternoon, around almost 4:00, I got this call saying, no, we have this other character for this other show. Would you mind coming in and doing that as well? And I was like, okay, sure. And so they faxed me, yes, kids, faxed me the sides, the lines from part of the script, and a drawing of what the character looked like. And I'm sitting in the cab because I lived on the Upper East Side, so it was just a 10-minute cab ride from my place down to the Henson workshop. Yeah. And I looked at this drawing, and it's this drawing of this bear. And he's got these little animals around him and this huge moon with a smiling face. And I thought, oh, this is cute. This is very kid show. And I was looking at the script and all that. And I walked in, and Peter Van Roden, who was an executive at the time, he said to me, do your own voice. And I said, what? We're the Muppets. We don't do that. He's like, no, do your own voice. And the point of it was they wanted Bear to be different from, say, a certain purple dinosaur that was roaming TV back then. They wanted to have just a fairly normal, kind of nurturing, soothing voice that both kids and adults could actually sit together and watch. Because that was the whole point of Bear. It was designed so that the way Bear spent time with his friends, kids and their grown-ups could spend time together with Bear and then continue on after that. And all that day, they had heard people come in, and of course, it was a bear. So voices like this, it's just all these gruffy voices. And so that's why he said, just do your own voice. And I was like, okay. And so back then, before I was married and had a kid, I called this my Uncle Noel tone. So whenever I would visit a friend who had kids, I would immediately go into Uncle Noel mode and just have this kind of tone of hey, what do you want to do? It's like, okay. It's like you make up the rules, we follow along, and just go with whatever the kid was doing. And I got into the outfit, and it was kind of just the understructure, so there was no fur on it. And you can actually find it on YouTube as well, called Under Bear Rarities. There's a clip of it, and you can see the understructure, because the fur would eventually go over this. But so it's kind of like looking at Bear as if it were a living X-ray of what's underneath the fur. Yeah. And I got inside, and it felt so good, and it was really great. And I was like, oh my gosh, this would be really fun to do. And then I realized, no, it's 4:45. It's Friday afternoon. You're not going to get this. They just want to cover their bases. Yeah. So that's when I just said, screw it. I'm just going to have fun. Yeah. And that's what pretty much I give advice to people. One of the advice I give about being a puppeteer. When you go for an audition, just have fun and then forget about it. Yeah. And so I did. I just had fun. And in the script, it called for him to, at one point, sniff and realize it's the viewer. And so that's when I just used the space and I was like running around. And suddenly I had the prototype head, like, look at the camera. And then I just ran up and jammed the nose all the way in and pulled it out and then jammed it in and pulled it out again and just had fun, like with the camera, like holding up a glass of water and holding up really close and having Bear's eyes on the other side. And then I said thanks and I left. And then the following Monday, around just before 6 o'clock, that's when I got a phone call saying, no, we'd like you to be Bear.
Wow.
And I was, what? And yeah, it's like, and so that's how it started. I just auditioned and just had fun.
Yeah.
And somehow fun won.
Yeah. And in terms of the show itself, how would you describe that to somebody who perhaps has never seen it?
Let's see. Well, you guys didn't have him over there, but growing up, I had this other kid show, Puppeteer, Fred Rogers, and it was called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. So a lot of people, one TV critic described Bear as Mr. Rogers in a fur coat. And it's just like this kind of like, Bear's very rare that he was an adult puppet character, because so many puppet characters reflect the little kid at home. But Bear was an actual grown-up. He was an actual adult. So it was, a Bruin who happened to own a home and had these little kid-like characters come by and visit him and spend the day, and he helps them discover the world around them. And at the end, he goes up and talks to his friend about the day he had, who just happens to be the actual moon. And she gives him kind of the big picture, the way he was like helping his little friends. And so pretty much it's a show about discovering the immediate world around you, because that was the whole premise. When little kids are really little, their world is their home. And so discovering everything around you just in your home and with the grown-up caregiver around you, that's pretty much the show.
Yeah. And I've seen in pictures as well, you have a kind of smaller version of Bear, just a panned version. It's not a full body version.
No, it's not. It's kind of like if Bear got stuck in the dryer. It's like put him in there. It's like my nickname for him is Cub, because it's like a smaller version. It's a puppet of a puppet, which is very meta. So.
And what do you use that for? Is that it's just more practical to use that when you go places?
Yeah, it was originally created because two very dear friends of mine, Paul McGinnis and Haley Jenkins, who are puppeteers, they were getting married a couple of years ago. And Haley was one of the puppeteers down at Walt Disney World at the Disney MGM Studios for the Bear Live on Stage show, where it was a show that had the puppet characters and puppeteers lip synced to our voices with the characters. She was one of the puppeteers, and she always loved the show. So Paul asked me and Tyler Bunch and Peter Lentz, who were also two of the originals from the series, would we do a song for the reception, the song Otter Love? And I thought, oh yeah, that'd be great. And then I thought afterwards, after saying yes to this, I thought, it's kind of weird to have like three grown guys up there just like doing these silly voices. So I thought it'd be really fun if we could like have puppets. And so I made like Pip and Pop puppets for Peter and Tyler. And then I wanted to make a bear for me. And I got the fur. I found fur that closely resembles like fur a bear would have. And James Voital Jr. is one of the builders of the original bear. Like he built like Bear's head. And so and he's a good friend of mine. And I asked James, like, okay, James, like, how do I do this? Like, what pattern should I have? And he kind of sketched it out. And then I kept all that one day, just kept texting back and forth. Do I do this? Do I do this? Finally, he just texted, no, just send me the damn fur. I'll just do it myself. And so he did. And the day of the wedding at the hotel, I get a knock on my door. James comes in with the bag and hands it to me. And I pull it out. And he is just this gorgeous little mini masterpiece of Bear. It's so professionally done, because James will always like give 190%, even when he's not getting paid for it, because he said like he has to look at it and be proud. And he just made this for me, and I've always used it, and I've credited him ever since. And I've used it for Comic-Cons. I actually was supposed to attend a Comic-Con in Ireland last year, but of course something happened. So, but I've used it for Comic-Cons. I'm also using it now on TikTok, because during the lockdown, my son, who at that time was 15, going on 42, he said, no, why don't you, I said, Dad, why don't you go on TikTok? And I said, what's a TikTok? And after a 2-minute patronizing explanation, he said, and you should use your bear puppets. Like, why? He's like, millennials grew up on Bear. They love Bear. And I was like, okay. And it was like, we're here. It's something to do. So I just did this little video saying, hi, I'm on TikTok. And it just exploded. And I've put these little videos on ever since. And people just continually comment on the fact that, it's one of the best parts of their childhood. My son said if we had $1 for every time someone used the word childhood, we could buy our own island at this point. And so I've used it on TikTok. I've used it on Cameo and Memo, which are these little apps where you can get a celebrity to say, wish you a happy birthday or congratulations. So I've done those as well. And it's been very honor. It's been an honor and just very humbling how people just still love this character and how he and his little friends still resonate after all these years. Because adulting is hard enough. And after last year, it's just been like putting people over the edge. So the fact that this character came back to say, hey, it's okay. You're going to get through this. And you're still smelling good. It just really helped a lot of people.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess as well, does working on a kid show feel good? Because you could be making a big difference in a small child's life.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing where it's, first of all, you're getting to do what you wanted to do. I mean, I'm very fortunate in that I got to do exactly what I set out to do from when I was in high school and college. Very few people do that. And so working on a kid show, like working on Bear, we were having fun because it was the opportunity for me, Tyler, Peter, Vicky Eibner, and Jim Krupa to really have fun and have these characters that were ours and we were creating them. But then as the show got more popular, that's when we would have kids come by and visit the set, which was great because it was a nice reminder of like, this is why we're really doing this. And it got so popular by the 4th season, we couldn't just like stop and start for kids to come by. So we set it up like every 2 weeks, we would set up so that a certain number of kids could come and visit the set. And so we would start at 9:00. We would shoot what we could until 10, which was usually the opening scene with Bear welcoming you. He's explaining what he's attempting to do. He gets interrupted. He introduces the theme of the day, and then there's usually Bear's song. And then at 10:00, that's when we would stop. And we would set it up so that kids could then come through. And the way the set was designed, they could come up the ramp, and there was the otter pond, and there was like Pip and Pop in the water. Then they go into the kitchen, and there's Trilo, and then Tutter is by his mouse hole, go into the foyer. Ojo is sitting there, and then finally come into the living room, and on the swing is Bear, kind of like Santa Claus. And all the while you take pictures, and then you would go out the door, and our assistant director, Dean Gordon, set it up so that a camera would follow the family from beginning to end, so that when they left, they could then take the tape with them, called it the bar mitzvah tape. And you could just take it with you as a memento of your visit. So we knew then, like, kids really liked it. Now it's a whole nother revelation. The fact that all those little kids are now grown up, and many of them now are having their own kids and now introducing their kids to Bear, and just realizing just how powerful this little show was to so many people. So many people have sent me messages on TikTok saying that this was like the best part of their childhood, or they've had a rough childhood. This was the only positive thing, or this was what they shared with their grandma or grandpa or their dad who have passed on, or parents who say like, this was like the best part of the day with my kids, and we would sit and watch, and we still sing the goodbye song. Some people, it's like 2 different people in the last week have said that they used the goodbye song for their wedding reception when it was time to go. And it was like one couple was in, I think, Detroit. Another couple was in like Australia. But these two couples had the exact same idea. Like, we're going to use the goodbye song for dinner. So it's like the fact that it just resonates after all these years. And next year, 2022, October of 2022 is the 25th anniversary of the show.
Wow.
Premiering. Yes. So it's been a while.
Yeah, definitely. And when you're puppeteering for a while, non-stop, your arm begins to hurt, doesn't it? So how do you cope with that?
Oh, you train it. It's you just get used to it. You do like exercises like, push-ups and sit-ups for your core, and also you stretch because you get into these contorted positions underneath. I mean, I've told different co-productions I've gone to for Sesame Street, because Sesame Street has Sesames all over the world. know,
Yeah.
you had your own Sesame called for a while, the Furchester.
Oh, yeah.
And so these co-productions you go, and a lot of times the puppeteers aren't puppeteers. They're people who've never puppeteered before. So you have to train them. And so they have to get used to the fact that your arm is going to be up. And sometimes you might be in a scene with other characters, and your character just comes in and just watches and listens, and that's it. And you just have to just train yourself by doing like I said, just like keeping your arm up. I had a friend come over recently, and he wanted to get his own like lesson in puppetry. I was like, okay. And we did this thing where I've done this with actual training for the other puppeteers around the world. And I said, okay, it's like my character and his character up in the frame, up in the camera. And I said, okay, we're going to play a game. We're going to play an alphabet game. In this game, I'm going to say a letter, and we're going to name a city. And I'll start, and we'll go back and forth. It's also a training of like looking at the camera and then looking at the character and then looking back in the camera and focus. But it's also kind of an endurance exercise too, like keeping your arm up. And he made it until the letter P, and then he just like. Actually, by the letter L, the characters kind of started sinking a little.
Yeah.
And then by P, he just dropped. He couldn't keep it up anymore. I was like, okay. So you just keep practicing.
Yeah.
It's the kind of thing. So you just get used to it, and you balance it out. So, you like if you use your right arm a lot, then stretch out, your left side as well to keep it balanced.
Yeah, definitely. And you've done some work with Last Week Tonight with John Oliver as well, right?
I have. John is the exact opposite of children's television. And it's great. He has always said he always wanted to do like the Muppet Show, and so he describes his show as closest to the Muppet Show as he's gotten. I always tell people it's like if you combine 60 Minutes, which was a magazine like news show here. If you combine 60 Minutes with Monty Python, like that's what Last Week Tonight is, because it's a very intelligent show with giving you straightforward, incredibly researched, accurate facts on topics a lot of times we wouldn't even think about, but then inserting that sort of irreverent humor to it to try and make it funny. So John did this great interview in Vulture Online back in February. And they were asking him about the mascots. The mascots are those big, huge, stupid things that wander out every now and then. And he credited me as being the majority of them and the fact that I was there. And he was so complimentary. And he really does. And he's also worked on with the Sesame Muppets.
Yeah.
And he really appreciates the fact that the puppeteers are actually professionals at what we do. Like you wouldn't just hand like a guitar to anybody and say, okay, play this. And it's the same thing with a puppet. You just don't hand a puppet to anybody and say, okay, like bring this to life and make it interesting, because you just really do need to practice it. And so he really appreciates that.
Yeah.
And they asked him, of all the mascots, which one kind of epitomizes the show? And he said, it's the giant squirrel, Mr. Nutterbutter, which I got to do, tied in with the whole Coal Baron Bob Murray thing. And so the fact that Nutterbutter could actually curse was great, because it's not TV, it's HBO. And so it's been really fun, like working with John, even in the Void that he was like stuck in for a year and a half. Then they're now back in the studio with a live audience. So I'm hoping before we wrap in November that I get to come back one more time.
Yeah, definitely.
And he's really nice. People ask, is he really nice? That he's one of the sweetest, nicest, most considerate men I've ever met.
And you've actually started a podcast during the pandemic as well, called Noel's Book Nook.
Yes, because that's what you do when you're locked down and can't go out. And you want to connect with people somehow. So yeah, I started doing it. It actually came about when a couple of years prior, my son came into our bedroom and said, okay, I'm going to bed. I was like, oh, okay. What story do you want me to read to you tonight? He was like, no, I'm good. And he came over and kissed my wife and kissed me and said good night. And he just like left. And we both looked at each other and just realized that like, that's it. It's just over. But that's what happens when you're a parent. There are certain things in childhood that just end without any preamble, without any getting ready for it. It just stopped. And so the bedtime story was like, it just stopped. And so during the pandemic, I thought, I've always wondered like what kind of podcast, if I were to do a podcast, do, because there's so many out there.
Yeah.
And then it occurred to me, it's like, well, what about reading? I always liked reading to my son, maybe with parents and kids stuck at home, and especially with people who remembered Bear so well. Maybe they could use this sort of Bear-like voice to like read them a story. And so that's what I did. So I did my podcast back here, Noel's Book Nook, and with stories and chapters from different books and poems. And it's very interesting reading like the original text of a lot of the stuff that we've gotten used to. Like one of the most bizarre, to the point of almost disturbing stories is The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. And let me tell you, there is no singing Jamaican crab in his original version at all.
Oh.
And so, yeah.
Yeah. Is it still appropriate though?
Oh yeah, it's fine. It's just like it's very long. It's like before the like, you know, we know it as Ariel, but the Little Mermaid, her other sisters would have this opportunity to go to the surface and kind of like spend the day, you know, observing like the surface world. And it goes on for pages, like each one's adventure, trying to set up the fact that she's intrigued by this, but it's like, oh my God, could we just get back to the actual, when is the sea witch coming? It's becoming like a travel log. Like, when are we getting to her part of the story?
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then I've read chapters from like Frankenstein and Alice in Wonderland, and Beatrix Potter is great because those stories are so short and so sweet. And that's the other thing. I had like, these are quote classics, but they're also public domain because after a certain year, I think now it's after 1932, you would have to pay a royalty to read from a book or a story from a book. But before that, it's public domain. So you can just read like whatever you want. Yeah. And so many of us grew up on these that we know the stories, or we think we know the stories, and then I started reading them and it's just like, oh yeah. But yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, definitely. And how's the Sesame Street movie coming along? Is it still paused?
Well, again, we were going to do that last year, and something happened.
Yeah.
So it might happen next year, or maybe the year after that. Ooh. So it isn't completely dead. It's kind of just like standing by for when things are a little more, I guess, stable and calmed down. So, but yeah, so it's standing by, but it's not coming anytime soon. In the meantime, watch Follow That Bird, because I worked on that movie. That was my first actual motion picture, and I got to work on it. And the very first character you see is Madam Chairbird of the Feathered Friends Society, and that's me. I got to do it. I got to puppeteer it and be the voice for it. And then I'm also Carol's stand-in and double for Big Bird in certain scenes, and I got to puppeteer other background characters. And then in the last scene, when Big Bird's finally back on Sesame Street, the social worker who's been chasing him across the country to get him back to his adopted family says he belongs with birds, his own kind. And Maria says, no, he has a family here, and we have all kinds. And that's when the camera does this 360 turn to show all the people and creatures that live on Sesame Street. That day we shot it, they didn't hire enough extras to populate the street. So it has become this sort of unofficial kind of tribute to everybody who worked on the movie. So we've got all kinds. We've got people, we've got caterers, we've got the camera operators, we've got props, we've got the lighting department, we've got Carol's wife, Debbie, we've got my mother who happened to be visiting, we've got me, we've got, so it's like this great like little cameo that nobody planned on. So watch Follow That Bird, and which still holds up even today. It's still a great movie by Tony Geist and Judy Freeberg about, you know, family is the theme, is the family is the people who love you, like that's it. And so it still holds up. So watch that. Yeah,
definitely. That's the original Sesame Street movie.
Yes, Follow That Bird.
Yeah.
Shot in Canada. Yeah.
Well, if we're interested in keeping up with all the work that you're doing, where can we do that?
Let's see. Right now, well, as you mentioned, on Last Week Tonight, it's great that they provide it on YouTube so that you can actually watch it there on YouTube. So on Last Week Tonight, have been various things like Mr. Nutter Butter and moose getting a colonoscopy and a polar bear with a shrinking private and the front half of a Scottish unicorn, the paws of a Supreme Court judge dog. I've been many things. And then I've got my own YouTube channel. It's called The Show Me Show. And it's a show I'm developing for kids with autism and special needs. And so I have a channel with little videos that kind of give you an idea of what the actual show would be like with my puppet Phineas and other puppet characters and friends who have also contributed their time and talent to it. And then on social media, I'm on Instagram at NMacNeal. I'm on Twitter at NMacNeal. I'm on, where am I? Oh, yeah, TikTok.
Ooh.
I think it's NMacNeal again. Cameo and Memo. Yeah, it's just like, it's way too much social media that's out there. Oh, and my book and my podcast, Book Nook, is available on Apple and Spotify and Anchor and wherever you get your podcasts.
Yes. Well, thanks for coming on the show today. It's been great having you here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Toby. Hope you and your listeners stay safe and enjoy autumn.